that island, New Guinea. Okay. But since the Japanese had so much problems with the Indonesian people in uprisings all over, okay, they figured if they call Sukarno president of the people, that they get more cooperation from the Indonesian people. But they miscalculated there too. But anyway, the problem was that when the Japanese surrendered, they should have, according the United Nations and according the rules, surrendered the weapons to us or the English. Mm-hmm. But instead, they surrendered the Japanese to the Japanese. And the aftermath of the Japanese war, and even the prison camp that I have gone through for 3.5 years, was nothing in comparison with what have happened with the population in Indonesia. I mean, the European population and the people that still sympathizes with the Dutch government. Okay. By the thousands and thousands, people were massacred because they got no weapons, they couldn't defend themselves, and Sukarno became, just like Hitler, instigator, and he instigated the people to go to war against the Dutch, kill, rape, do ever what you have to do as long as you get rid of the Dutch. And that's why we had all the massacres going in Indonesia. American people, not even the outside world knew about that. So when the people were freed from prison camps, we had an enormous amount of people back in the army, trained in Manila with the weaponry from Manila. We went back to Indonesia, okay, to get the old government back, but we were not allowed to land because of MacArthur. That's where all the massacres have taken place. Every night, not in all the areas where my wife was, because of the difference with the people, okay, it didn't happen, but Java, Sumatra, Bali, okay, every night when it was getting darker, you could hear the tong-tong, the hollowed trees, okay, all over, and that you hear the shouting, kill the Dutch, kill the Dutch, rape the women, kill the Dutch, all night long. And they were going out, start killing and raping, even pregnant women were ripped open, and the children were put on lances and or either that stuck to a tree. And I can substantiate it because many times I was called to pick up the corpses. Okay. That was even more terrible than the time that we had before. So from hell we went into another hell. So personally, I was in the army, so I didn't have nothing to do, with not being able to defend myself. Okay, but then later on, we took over again, and we were able to invade Indonesia and start cleaning up. So when that happened, we got a situation like Vietnam. But there was a difference in Vietnam. We belonged there. We were born and raised, most of us who came back, came from prison camp. We belong in that country. Okay? We didn't want to go to another country either. We want our place there in Indonesia. But we were thwarted by the United Nations. Okay.
You like sayur?
I don't know.
You don't know what sayur is?
I'm not familiar with that one.
Lode. Lode.
Sure.
You know sayur lode?
Do I?
sure.
I'm sure I've had it.
Oma has made it over there. Henk, je moet your experience.
Oh, my experience.
Yeah, your
My
experience.
experience there.
Je moet een history lesson geven.
Well, this is for the university to know, because most people don't even know
background.
what is going on.
Yeah, but there
They-
are a lot of books there all over at the university. They have historical books about it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, I
I
had
want
one
he wants
guy.
to know
Well, no,
your
your
experience.
I had
feelings.
one guy.
Your feelings, your experience.
Angry. Yeah, wanting to get home. Sure.
You want my experience from prison camp?
Yeah.
Oh boy. You'd be astonished, so. Well, I was only 18 and a half when I became prisoner of war. And like I said, we had many Japanese before the war, okay? They were just merchants. They were selling stuff to people, the European population. And just, so when we were in, my father was a Dutch officer too, in the Dutch-Indonesian army, okay? After he retired, he decided to go have a plantation in South Sumatra, okay? He had a large family, he had 7 boys and 3 girls, so it came in handy later on, okay? So in 1931, we went to South Sumatra from a place where we were all the time in east of Java. It's called Melang, okay? From there, the whole family were transferred to South Sumatra, way out in the jungle where the plantations were, okay? And that's where I grew up. And
What did you
till
grow?
the time that I was inducted in the army, because you're 17, you can be inducted in the army, what they call militia. Okay? And since I was transported to Java, I didn't have no contact with my family in Sumatra no more. And I stayed in the army. I became a regular in the army. Okay. And pretty soon after that, the Japanese overran Indonesia and I became a prisoner of war. So I remember the day that we have to register as a POW for the Japanese. And I went into a room and I just couldn't believe my eyes. The man behind the desk was the same man who used to bring the stuff to my parents every month. The things that we need, like soap and things like that. And he was a Japanese colonel.
Ooh.
He greeted me with, "Hi Henk, you remember me?" Well, in Dutch, because he speaks Dutch. Oh yeah, they were going to school with us and everything. That's how deeply involved they were all those years while they were over there. That's the same with the Chinese. Chinese population was in the millions even. Okay. And the end was that he said, "Take this, a pack of cigarette and good luck." That was it. And that was my first experience. And later on, because the Japanese were so intense about
Ik kan alles. Ik kan alles.
going through the motions, that they were so powerful nothing could stop them, and the next step was Australia, and that would be it then. But that's where they made a mistake. In the meantime, Australia supplied enough to stop the Japanese. Okay? They made the same mistake like Hitler made a mistake with England. When they had decided to invade England, Hitler said, "Well, let's take a break." That's where he made the mistake. And that's where the Spitfire can come in, okay? And that's the same with the Japanese. This guy in Singapore stopped for a while, took a breather, and that's where he made the big mistake. So by the time they were going to Australia, they were clobbered all over. And in the meantime, being so sure that they could not lose the war, the Japanese were a little bit different. As a person per se, they're more human, okay? Because they have to find a way to get our sympathy, okay, to sympathize with them, so they get more result in doing so. Because even though they were out to eliminate or to liquidate all the European people in Indonesia, they still needed us for war purposes. And that's why the prisoners were sent all over, even to Japan and Korea and all over, to work in shipyards and mines and what have you. So my first experience was that many POWs were already gathered together and sent overseas. But then we got to hear, oh, I don't know where the spies come from, where the rumors come from, but it seems like they always knew something was going on. Oh yeah.
Well, I keep a lot of things on the counter too, but I like mine.
So we come to the period that POWs were transported all over by the Japanese to work on their war purposes and the war industry of building airfields and what have you, everything that has to do with
Look at this. This is what I was talking about. They're beautiful?
that's what we call a chikar.
Yeah.
And those are the carabao.
Caribou. Carbao.
Carbao. And the background, that must be the Merapi or another gunung, another mountain. But that's how they transport their stuff to the market.
Oh, that I brought.
Show him downstairs die mythical, hoe heet het toch, hunter.
Oh, die POW, beneden.
Ja, dat heb ik gezien beneden. Downstairs there is another one like this, but that is more a mythical figure on the hand.
This is batik.
Yeah.
This is special stuff, handmade by well-known batik. It is that is art. That's pure art too. But anyway, about being in prison camp.
Nog stil. Dat is hem zitten hier.
Soon we became confused because they needed more and more POWs to work for their war purposes. And since we didn't know what was happening, except for some rumors that many ships were torpedoed already because of the activity of the American Navy and the Air Force, we put two and two together, and being transported to such long traject, something must have happened. And that's where we got to know that many ships were torpedoed and the ship went under with the POWs. So when those rumors were heard by the people, we got scared. And the only way to prevent yourself from being transported to other countries was with the Japanese to be sick. And the Japanese were very scared for infectious diseases like gonorrhea and dysentery and what have you. So when we were inspected before we were transported, we usually have to line up. And the night before we have to collect our feces. And while we were lined up, we have to show to the Japanese doctor our visas, and those that were
Want I know jullie nooit haren dat
affected by dysentery
heel speciaal.
had blood in their visas, and it just so happened that I was affected by dysentery. And even though it might sound funny now, but in those days it was absolutely serious business. Okay? From the standpoint,
Waar gaan ze naartoe?
I never was aware how good a salesman I was. And being in prison camp, each day is survival day. Regardless what the consequences were, you have to see that you can survive that particular day. And so I got the idea about going into selling something that was also beneficial to other POWs. And even so you see a smile on my face, but when I'm going to reveal you where I became aware of my salesmanship, you might laugh about it, but this is really what have happened. I came with that lunacy idea to collect my visas in little parts, and at night I went to the POWs and said, you know what, if you don't want to be transported and take the chance of being torpedoed, why don't you take some of my visas? So I did that part. I was charging 10 cents for it. Like I said, it is comical now, but it was not comical. And so that's where I became a salesman. But pretty soon the Japanese caught on, so because they knew something was going on. Not so many people all of a sudden can be affected by dysentery. Yeah, so then later on, regardless whether you had that disease or not, you were put on the ships and transported to wherever you had to go. That was my first experience about being a salesman. Pretty soon it was my turn to be transported. I think altogether were 22,000 POWs. At that time I was in Bandung, or outside Bandung, a place called Cimahi, where the military barracks were of the Dutch-Indonesian army, the Dutch army before. And from there we were transported to Jakarta, what was called Batavia then. And every time when we were transported, the windows were already painted black of the trains that we were transported in. So till we had reached the place of destination, and that's where we put another camps, prepared for the transportation to whatever the Japanese had in mind. Then from Batavia, en masse, long trains, we were transported to Surabaya. And in Surabaya we were gathered together and selected to go to certain countries like Japan and Burma and Formosa and other areas that deemed necessary for the Japanese to be supplied with more labor. And the day came that we embarked at the ships there, and the name was Kunutawa Maru. The Japanese 15,000 ton. And the ships were not on the harbor, but they were more on stream. So we were transported with little motorboats to the big ships, and then hauled over to on deck of the big ships. So I remember vividly what have happened when we were aboard already and were selected to go in the hall. that's where we were transported.
Oh, even rusten en some fruit. Moet
But-
je some fruit, Justin?
No thanks.
Oh, je hebt jullie eens ice cream gegeven?
Yeah.
Je gaat doorpraten over...
I remember when I was sitting outside on top of the deck, I was right behind a winch, a big winch that the Japanese used to operate their cranes. And before I knew it, there was a tremendous bang, and all we could see is one ship just cut it all over. It turns out that they were sabotaged by either the English or the Australians who were on it. So I never will forget that. I've seen plates, steel plates, 10 feet long, 6 feet wide, going all over. The ship was just pulverized. It seems like the Japanese were transporting ammo. And that's what they did with the hospital ships too.
Yeah.
So their ploy was to give the idea that they were transporting only people, so they wouldn't be torpedoed or attacked by the Americans. Okay. But regardless, later on, because the first experience I had, we were on a ship and we even wrote down with chalk POW, but nevertheless we were attacked by the American submarines already. And usually you had 2 times that they bring you up from the hulls, okay, to have a breather. But when the Japanese were attacked, they got a rotten trick of holding the people in the hull and close the hull up and close the entrance of the hulls. So if the ship goes with the
Dat is waar,
POW.
dus I have to fill it tomorrow in the corner.
I came to the conclusion that even though they needed us as laborers, eventually that was their aim, to liquidate all European people, the whole European people, the whole European people population. Because in Indonesia, whether you belong to the military or not, pretty soon all European people were put in camps, including my parents, and they have perished in prison camp too. So it was not only POWs from the military, the civilians were put in camps too, the European population.
When did you find out about your parents?
And
After the war,
After.
he doesn't hear him. Henk zegt, how do you find about your parents after the war?
no, not after, even before the war.
What?
Before the war, yeah, out here, the one, the psychic.
Yeah, but you knew about your parents after
But
the war
anyway,
that they died.
That ship that I was on was attacked by the Americans too, but it never sunk. So instead of being transported to Japan, we were transported to close by island, and that was the Amboina, that's close to New Guinea, the Molucks, what they call it. Okay, and that's where we have to work for the Japanese and for to create the airfields. The point where I was the first time when we were debarked after the transportation, on a clear day,
Talking about
we could
Indonesia.
see-
Look who is in Indonesia, matey. Now you have
we
to
could
stop.
see the coast of New Guinea
Matey van Van Linden.
where the Americans have landed already.
Ja, waarom moet toch? Ja, hier.
Many of us have tried, have made an attempt, broke out and have tried to reach the Americans. but they were caught and they were beheaded too. So, being so close to New Guinea, where the Americans were,
Wat doen ze daar op Jakarta? Dat is midden
there was a period that sometimes we were strafed and bombed by the Americans, sometimes 6, 7, 8 times a day, to the point that we didn't even bother about going back in the barracks. We just stayed in the shelters. Because close to the Moluks, you had the oil fields too. And the Japanese had a tremendous force there. And I've seen the cruisers coming in after they were attacked by American cruisers and American submarines, almost 45 degrees for repair work. Okay, big Japanese cruisers, battleships. But what the Japanese did, working for them, working on the war industry going on, they transported us like the baton march from one camp to another camp to another camp to another camp, and so on, so on, so on, till we have reached Kota Ambon. Kota means city, the city of Ambon. And that was a fortress. The Dutch have built a fortress. But it was so important for the Americans to do as much damage to the Japanese as possible to prevent them from supplying more troops to New Guinea. Because the Japanese were strong in New Guinea too. Okay. So I remember the day that, and I just found it not too long ago, the day that the Americans were about to bomb Kota Ambon. And fortunately, we were in front of that island, of the island of Ambon, on a small island where they have built POW camps, and that's where we were at that moment. It was around about 9 o'clock in the morning. First we saw all the fighter planes from the Dutch and the Americans going around strafing the Japanese, the barracks and everything. And later on we heard a sound that I'll never forget that. And I counted 124 flying fortress coming over.
They understand. Maybe there are other people that.
They opened the bomb bay just before the beach for a better aim. And then they let one bomb out, and then later on they just emptied the whole plane with bombs there. It was flattened. The whole city was flattened. And now I found a boat that has happened 3 times. So in the meantime, after it have happened the first time, we were transported to another island, and that's why I never knew that. They have done that time after time, time after time. So. And with so many Japanese in Kota Ambon,
I have to pay $15.
we were ordered to clean up the city 2 days after the attack. Okay, and I remember there were so many Japanese were killed there, and with all the bombs that have been thrown. No wonder there was not much left. It was just pieces that we have to gather together of the Japanese corpses. And because of the heat being pressured by the Americans, the plan of the Americans were to invade Ambon. If that would have happened, right now, I'm not here to relay all this to you. Because we had a camp commander, our camp commander, he said, if that happened, if the Americans land, if the Americans start to invade, the only thing that we can do to help ourselves is to overpower the Japanese. Yeah, it's easier done than said. It's easier said than done, matter of fact. But that was the only way for us to protect ourselves. Okay? Because in the meantime, the Japanese have ranked the camps with shelter, but they were not shelters. That's what they had in mind. If in case of an invasion, the POWs would have been driven into those ditches and surrounded by the machine guns, we would have been massacred by the Japanese. That's why the idea of the Dutch camp command. The only way to do it is to overpower the Japanese and try to save yourself. But it became so hot that the Japanese decided to transport us to another island where they also needed to have the airfield for in between trip for the ship, for the ships and for the air force going from one island to the other island, like the springboard. And with the experiences in prison camp, there are so many things. I always have been a rebel from day one up. I always was out to protect myself, but sometimes the protection was not adequate. So by protecting myself, I mean that I make sure that I never go hungry. Even if I have to steal, even I have to take consequences, I always seem to be able to get something to keep myself alive. So in the meantime, I have learned to eat dog, cat, snakes, snails, including rat. There were moments in prison camp, because of the activity of the Americans going on, that not even the Japanese had enough to eat. So if you spotted a rat or a couple of rats, you better don't tell the others, because pretty soon you will have 10, 15 people going after that one particular rat. And if you hear me talk rat, you probably think about diseases and how dirty they are, but brother, if you're hungry, you don't ask how it tastes. When that stomach starts to complain, it doesn't matter how it tastes. And that's why I got to know that even rats are good tasting too. If you're hungry enough, you eat rats.
How do you prepare it?
Well, you prepare it. We had certain hours that we can do for ourselves. The Japanese allowed you, okay, because they still have to keep you alive. Don't forget that, no? Because you have to be a laborer, and it was easier for them not to be bothered by supplying you the food and what you can supply yourself. But sometimes it got out of hand. If the ship comes in and we had sugar and rice and what have you, many times it happened that the Japanese couldn't use their cranes to unload the ships. So it goes by hand. And I had a bad habit about going through the barracks. So going through the barracks, we had sick people in the barracks already. So they knew that I had something that they could use. So by the time from one end of the barrack to the other end, I wound up with nothing at the end. So and I did that many times. And that is what I mean by taking a risk to stay alive. When it all started, being in prison camp, you could not survive by yourself. That's why it is so important to find other people you can cooperate with, and together you try to help each other and stay alive. So with other words, if you're sick, I take care of you. If I'm sick, you take care of me. Okay, that's the only way to survive. And being in that area, there came a day that there was almost nothing left, not even for the Japanese. And that's, you have to understand that the Ambonese people were special people. Why they are so special is because they're good soldiers. They're fierce fighters, they're good soldiers. And these people can be compared to with the Gurkhas of the English. And being in the army, doing the duty in the army, this goes from generation to generation.
Henk, ga later even koffie drinken.
But stop then even.
You cook it a little bit, or
Oh yeah, they allow us to have
a little bit of salt?
yeah, we have
Little.
stuff to handle things with. But
Okay, good.
sometimes the contraband you have to bring in the camp, you have to take chances.
I don't know.
And
No.
Japanese are, you have to know the philosophy of the Japanese.
In fact, we were.
Because I remember at one time this was still in Java. Here we go back to being a salesman again. And I used to box in the army for the units, not for money, for the unit, you know. And you're lucky if you get the day off, if you're good, okay? Because you defended your unit against another unit. And I remember one time we had about 7 carts with contraband.
Yeah.
The guys were taking a chance, but we got caught by the Japanese.
Thursday, we're having rain,
And
and then
we were questioned by the Japanese who was the ringleader, and you know that you cannot have the contraband, you know, and you still commit yourself to doing the things you shouldn't. And that's where we got clobbered by the Japanese. But they still wanted to know who the ringleader was. Now, I didn't have nothing to do with the contraband. I was not involved. So all of a sudden I got the idea that, you know what, they're all chicken to come forward and to admit that they have started this, you know, and that they had tried to bring the stuff in the camp. You know.
That heeft nothing to do with
What can happen to me?
Tuurlijk, je kunt
That operation I was. Okay. So finally, because usually if they cannot get something out of you,
earlier
they let you, how you call it, when you do the push-up. But with luck,
I have only those little things.
elbows, okay? And you have to stay there for a while like that, okay? And then they had the bad habit, if they still cannot get, interrogate you and they still cannot get anything out of you, they put hot coal underneath you. And if they still cannot have anything, then they let you make push-ups. You know what that means, with hot coal on. Yeah.
So have you decided,
So,
are you gonna have them inset?
Knowing what would have happened if nobody came out to admit, okay,
These don't matter.
I got the idea, I said, what the heck, I might as well
Cause you want,
step forward. And that's what I did.
and I just said if you keep it short.
Because the Japanese were so mad, he didn't succeed in getting to know who was the ringleader.
Around, so she opens.
But
the window
apparently the
area up.
Japanese
It'll look great if it's.
must have
sits on the window.
an idea that
But if she keeps it
I
on the
was
outside of the window, it should go all.
jumping
floor.
forward
Going to have to
to
go
protect the others,
That's what I
okay?
told her is the best. She's even
So
really nice to
when I
listen
got in front of him, he clobbered me a couple of times and made me kneel, and he clobbered me more. Then all of a sudden, he stopped.
But why do
Because
you-
in their eye at that moment, this particular
I have to pay
guy,
my grades. I don't have.
I was a hero for sacrificing myself, okay? But before that happened,
But if you
I
have
went
those
around
things,
with
you
the
have
guys and
Don't you
said,
have that?
No.
Oh,
I take the blame, I will take the rest.
Nothing.
But whatever you have,
Yeah.
a half is for me.
blinds and curtains.
And,
You close them at night, the curtains.
and they agreed right away, okay? And
on the side.
strange enough, the Japanese, maybe you already knew that they were going to win the war anyway, and that's why my mentioning they're more human. Okay. Let us
I
go.
think if she puts the
Take off.
The Koreans were, what, 6 foot?
The reason they were
Nee,
bastards
maar zoals je
is
zegt, stel niet
because the
dat,
Koreans and the
staat op
Formosans
de party, you just take off.
were never recognized to
So
be
a sister in
full
law,
Japanese.
you know, you have to see what
So there was a clash,
thank God to have a
even though the Japanese were for so many years in Korea and Formosa, the people were not the same. Okay. There was discrimination even under the Japanese when it comes to Koreans and Formosans.
And that happens with
Being
the
hated,
Indos too.
yeah, being hated by the Japanese, they also were hated by us, the Allies. I say Allied because we had American POWs too, among the Dutch and the English and the South Africans and all those, the other people who were involved. And these son of guns were sometimes even meaner than the Japanese. You have to understand, the Japanese, most of them are
Sama's
inductees.
older sister, her name is Florida.
They probably didn't want the war either, okay?
That card, she's on the
But
card.
it is the bulk, the military, okay, that have created the problems that we had in all those years, okay?
I'm working
But
on it.
many times
I'm
we
trying
have
to
seen
design a
the difference
design
between the
tool around
Japanese
it.
and the Koreans.
Frame design.
They don't even mingle
I
with
wanna put
themselves,
that around
with,
that.
with the real
And then frame
Japanese. They stayed with their
It
own
doesn't have to
kind.
be too
That
big.
is what she does.
And
I'm not.
that's where we start to
You know what I'm
learn
trying
the
to do?
philosophy
I'm trying
of
to-
the Japanese.
You know what what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make it a little,
The
the
left
print
is
a
a
so
little bit
many-
larger, but I'm trying to make it long, so that it'll hang below. Towing and.
Not knowing really what the Japanese were as only the time that I grew up there with them. We had Japanese in schools and Chinese in schools and other people too.
That,
Okay.
that's a stamp that she used and then she hand.
When I was
hand
growing
does it
up,
all.
I only
But the
knew
Chinese-
about
See, you have all different.
samurai
kinds of scripts
hero.
on the computer.
Uh-huh.
Choosing
So in a
one.
way,
So
I
I'm
had
choosing a script of what I want it to
a
be
respect
written
for
to.
the Japanese.
You know, where it's
Okay.
legible and.
But I didn't know
Designing things on the computer.
what they
And the other one from
could
the-
do in different circumstances, like the German people.
Someone sent it to her. and then
I
she
found
was-
out after the war, the German people, the regular common German
said she
people,
wanted the picture
are
of
not
her husband is.
as they were pictured under Hitler. Okay, that is the difference. And so it was so with the Japanese
So
the
what
same
time
way,
you get your card tonight?
because after the
Oh,
occupation, the Japanese planted
She's going to the-
economies in,
I heard them say
in
6:30.
Indonesia. The Japanese economies from Japanese to
If we get a chance.
uh,
we'll try after dinner.
govern
You know, if we get a chance.
the system in Indonesia. They didn't want to do anything with
Oh, you're
the
going on
European system. They wanted their own system instilled.
He's gonna change his
in the
clothes, we're gonna
people.
get in the car and go.
So it takes
How
how
long
long
And-
is
to
the
stay off?
overdrive?
You find that the regular Japanese, the civilians,
That's about 5.5, 6 hours.
they really
Depends
act
on how
different
many
than
times you
people
stop.
in the military.
Go to the bathroom often.
There wasn't different if you were guarded by
Even then to go to
the
Cincinnati.
Japanese from the Navy.
Because that,
Because
Like
Seems-
Cincinnati is
Yeah.
northwest of us,
yeah, for
quite a ways.
They adhere more to the rules and regulations of the Geneva Conference.
Portsmouth is way
But it
down.
was the army, those were the bastards.
Generally state.
But
we used to visit.
you learn that
water
through
there at the
being in,
school.
in prison camp,
Yeah.
you know,
Cincinnati is mainly.
the differentiation between one and the other.
No.
75.
And
We only travel on 75
surprisingly,
Finley,
to
Ohio.
me,
And then we travel 15 over to
there were
23. And once you
subordinates
go 23, it's only 55
under the
miles.
Japanese too and the Koreans.
You know, you have to drop 10
Because
miles.
I found
and
out the
go off.
first camp commander that
Then
we
there's
had
quite a
in
few
Amboina
cities in between
was
there and
Christian,
Portsmouth that you can
and
drop
his
down to
wife was
45,
a
then
European.
35, then 25 through the
But because of his mildness, of his ease with the POW, pretty soon he was transferred to another place,
70 miles an hour
and
when we were young.
somebody else came in
We used to be able to
in
do it
his
in
place.
4.5 hours.
That's where we got the bad time going.
Well, I'm talking about the time
Because
that it was still 75.
regardless what the Japanese were up to
Cincinnati back and forth.
a certain point that they still needed your labor,
Olympia,
they allowed you to stay alive.
Detroit, and to Ann Arbor.
So
With 2 days,
being the rebel
Oregon.
and
Washington.
being able to keep myself alive in my way made it easier for the Japanese. But sometimes I got caught and I got clobbered again, and I got clobbered again, and I clobbered again.
It's fast, too.
But
Young people.
Yeah.
if you're born
A lot goes through.
a hardhead,
Where
you stay a hardhead.
farmland.
But
Yeah.
the point is that you have to work hard for yourself in order to survive, and that was the only way.
I think we do.
Well, like I said, I was called in prison camp the Hondemapper. The Hondemapper, the Hond is mean dog,
We were telling her that.
and mapper is actually that I clobbered the dog.
Well,
Okay.
you wish he has
But
it
he
is.
has-
I'm not a dog catcher, no. I clobbered him because I volunteered to clean the Japanese kitchen. Okay, and sometimes I find things that I can use for my own,
Ja, wij zijn allebei
use.
een lappe man, you know.
and that's where I was waiting for the dogs to come because they start to sniffle between the pants, the big pants,
What is she?
because of the smell. Okay? And then when I had the chance, I see the dog head, and I just smash his dog head. See? Then I clean the dog, I extract, I get the bouillon,
They just
and
came home and she called.
I gave the bouillon to the sick people in our sick bay, and I consumed the meat with my group that I belong to.
Younger than her.
That was the only way. And whether it's a dog or a cat, or a snake or a snake, whatever, you know, that is a matter of survival.
She still thinks
A snail? There was that? Was there a lot?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah, oh, we're just deep in the jungle, what do you expect?
Yeah.
You know, but there's so many ways that you can survive, and for me it was easier because I knew the jungle because of the plantation. You can put me in the jungle, I survive. I know how to survive in the jungle. I knew what is edible, and that kept me alive too. Not even the English knew what they could eat, and they said, "Oh, you're gonna die." I said, "Well, if I die, then I die. You know, then I don't have to suffer no more." But those are the edible things that were still available then. But then later on, after so many years, there was nothing left no more. Nothing to graze. So that's where you start doing the most unusual things. Like one time we were going home and there were 2,000 of us POWs. We were working on the airfield. And a friend of mine knew my habits and my daring. And he said, Henk, look to the right. I said, what do you see? I see a coconut tree. He said, what do you see in the coconut tree? I said, "Yeah, I see one more coconut left." He said, "You got guts?" He said, "You bet." And it just so happened the Japanese were not guarding us in the back, but up front, because they figured out we could go anywhere, we couldn't escape anywhere. So 2,000 people, I got out the line, I got in the tree, and that coconut was an old coconut between my teeth, and I got back in the line. So that's what I mean by, you know, taking the risk, survival. If they would have spotted me, that was turkey shoot right there. Okay, but that is a matter of survival, and that is day in, day out. Or sometimes we go past by Japanese barracks, hoping that I found something that I could use, okay? I just got out the line, I jumped in one of the windows, open windows there, I grab a shoe and I go back in the line. And it just so happened it was my size. And not to make it obvious, coming home I just cut it, you know, and put dirt and things so that they wouldn't become suspicious about it. But those are the things you have to do to survive. And that's the only way. Lucky we had a doctor, Dr. Engel. Engel is angel in English. So. And he had tremendous knowledge about plants and roots and medicine that was supplied by Mother Nature. Okay. So he instructed us, whatever we found working for the Japanese, to bring it to him first so he can inspect it and tell you whether it is edible or not. And that man did a tremendous job for us. But my knowledge was adequate enough for me that I found going through and working for the Japanese and putting up the airfield was enough for me to feed myself while I was being outside. And that is the interesting thing about how far you can go in endurance. And it's very important to be positive every day. You have to. You cannot feel sorry for yourself. Because the Japanese are funny people. I remember when we were grouped by the Japanese to open up the jungle. Okay? They even bribe you to get the most out of you. They bribe you. Is that you see this area? Well, the 14 of you. If you can clear that in the fastest way, the rest of the day, you have a day off. It's yours, okay? So you work like a hell. Like a son of a bitch, okay? But then the next day, they make it a little bit bigger.
Oh, did you go there?
And another day, a little bit bigger. So that's where they put you to a point that this is what I can get out of them. And that's what they demand. Once you're crazy enough to work your head off and do the same thing what you did the day before.
Oh no, this
Buckle.
is nothing. This one.
Buckle.
X. A buckle. Now this is a plain belt buckle. Belt buckle.
The Indonesian
Honest
buckle
to God,
No, I know, but I didn't
there
see
came a
it.
period that
from Michigan.
there were no flies around no more. So,
Oh, this
and
is
I have to
a
admit, very few illnesses that we have and sick people
Hawaii.
because
You're
of the
not from
hygiene.
Hawaii?
And there's one thing that the Japanese insisted after we
I don't
got
even have a
back
belt.
from working on the airfield and working for the Japanese, that we
What is this?
were,
Only.
that we were sure that we take a bath every day. Okay, that was another thing about the Japanese. That is what I mean by you have to know the Japanese philosophy.
I don't know.
Sometimes that give you the idea, oh, they're not that bad. But there's always a purpose behind it when they had something in mind. And that's why if you don't know how to penetrate the Japanese philosophy, you're in
Ja,
trouble.
dan ben je net in Hawaii geweest. Hang loose, that's for you. You hang loose all the time. Dan hoor je mij daar. Dit moment natuurlijk.
What I really need is a wallet.
Oh, moet je een
Show
wallet
you.
hebben?
This is what I have for a wallet.
You ask them.
Oh,
You ask
In
them
mijn
for
hoedtas.
Both will probably give me a wallet.
Dat is te veel hoor.
In de hoedtas. Oh, ongeveer, ja. Ik is die ene.
Thank you for the sentiment, but I You don't even wear a belt.
But when it comes to our supply, the Japanese supplying us what we need to stay alive, we had the last couple, maybe 6 months before they dropped the atomic bomb, okay, there was no more rice, so we got corn. And corn that was years and years old with corn borers in it. But like I said,
Eat the
that
boars.
that was extra meat too. You find those worms, okay, that is extra meat, so you cannot be choosy, okay. I remember in Ambon, what they call sago, S-A-G-O, sago. They somehow are able to get flour out of it. And
Can
like,
you use a small? There.
See?
The universe just opens right up.
yeah,
Wow. Thank you.
Got a nice wallet.
they got flour out the sago tree, okay.
Dan moet hij van
And
zijn oma
I found out pretty soon that the old sago trees houses worms,
Open for money.
almost as big as my thumb.
But it has the money.
Lots of oil. And you better watch out if you see a nest with those worms, not to tell others. Because they go after the worms too. Because you need it, you need the fat and so on. And what I did, I collected all those worms by the hundreds, and then I fry them. So the oil is what I use to prepare my food, okay? And the rest I eat, the skin, okay? But that's sometimes what happened if you had the sago boom tree where they housed, they're housed by the hundreds and hundreds there. And that keeps you alive too, it is nutritious besides that, okay? So these are the things you go through in surviving what you have to survive, okay? And if you choosy and you become sick and there is nobody to care of you, for sure you're gonna die. And because of the malnutrition, the lopsidedness of food that we were taking, we had lots of berry. Berry is a deficiency. Okay, you had the wet berry and you had the dry berry. I had a friend, he was 230 pounds. I have seen him come down to 90 pounds. That's what they call the dry berry, it dries you out. The other one is the other way, it fills you up. And many times when we're in the barrack, we got no light after work, you know. We POWs, we sleep with each other there and we talk to each other and pretty soon you don't hear him say anything about it. Then you turn him around and he's dead. Because with wet berry, once the liquid start to go up in your lungs, it reaches the tops of the lungs, that's it. You die.
Probably right after Matthew.
So we had all kinds of diseases in prison
But she
camp
was very thin.
at one moment, okay, especially the last days, especially the one before they dropped the atomic bomb. If Dutch was the atomic bomb, my group, it's called the Muna group, one island. The 40% left, 60% have perished. So, talking about survival, the strongest of the strongest only can make it in a situation like that.
Especially when you get kids so close from here,
What else can I say about
Then
survival in prison
lost
camp?
about 10 pounds, you know, after she had him, and then she got pregnant with him. You know,
Yeah,
right
too
away.
close.
And the Indonesians and the Dutch-Indonesians, that identity crisis. I mean, full-blooded Indonesians.
That's another thing, okay, and that really had opened my eyes after the war.
It's not like apartheid that you so
what was going on in
There
Indonesia
was
when
still-
the
it-
Dutch
it's
were
like the
reluctant
initial
to
thing in
give
the north.
total independence
It
to
was
the,
not like in the
the
south.
Indonesians.
But there was still a racial difference.
I couldn't completely agree
I
with the
know,
Dutch.
think of it,
They
because
should
if
have
you find
realized
a
Yeah.
full-blooded
that
Dutch will
somehow
have a job earlier than an Indo.
they wanted their own
Our family
independence,
was
and I agree with that.
Yeah?
Being born and raised
We
there,
were the ones
I
that
fully
were there
agree
during
with the
war.
people. Okay,
We had
But
job bags, had the
you have to
pharmacy.
understand that
There
to
were
govern
Dutch coming.
a country
They
like
got
the Dutch
fired
East
for
Indies
more than we were
uh,
getting.
isn't easy. The Dutch have done it for 350 years, you know,
We stayed
but
to strike.
there's a lot,
It didn't
there's so
help.
many things
All we-
that
all
you
we
have to
got
know about the
were
country itself,
punishment
okay? But when
by
it comes to
being, hoe heet dat toch, in a fabric, in a plant.
differentiated between
There was.
the colonies of the English, okay, and one is South Africa,
And, well, we
the American
ourselves
people cannot
did not.
understand that there never was apartheid in Indonesia.
It was not like here.
While there was no apartheid in Indonesia,
We talked to everybody.
there was
But
slavery
when
in the
it
United
comes
States.
to our social life,
Something
it
that
still
I was
there.
not aware of.
You know, we were.
The extent I knew from the books and from the information I
was
had
working, for
that
instance, with
there was a situation here
big Chinese,
that we couldn't
Indonesian Chinese people.
probe deeper into it,
They were my
About
friends at work.
what was going on with with the African people, okay, the
When they were
African Americans,
talking
okay.
about, say,
But being criticized by the outside world, including the United States,
I don't know.
about the atrocities that we have committed while the Dutch were trying to occupy Indonesia completely again, okay? At the same time, the slavery was still going on, so I cannot put this together, okay? Being criticized for what we were doing, what was not true, the atrocities were